Disaster. More than half of the souls on board the Sewol ferry remain unaccounted for. Rescue efforts continued all night long. The captain of the ship may have been trying to take a shortcut rather than the recommended route to Jeju Island. Dense fog delayed the departure. And we bring you harrowing images captured by the rescue team at the site of the sinking. Hello and welcome to News Today on KBS World. It's Thursday, April 17th. I'm Luke Ferry. Rescue efforts continue at the site of the sinking of the Sewol passenger ferry. The ship capsized Wednesday morning on its way to the southern island of Jeju. More than 450 souls were on board, including over 300 high school students. Rescue workers were there all night searching for survivors.
A flare burst over the capsized ship, lighting the part of the hull peeking out of the water. Rescuers from the Coast Guard and Korean Navy approached the lighted vessel. 20 Coast Guard and Navy divers were sent underwater 30 minutes after midnight to search the ship's submerged interior. The Coast Guard had tried to conduct the underwater search at around 6 p.m. yesterday, but the strong currents put a stop to the search. So the search and rescue mission resumed around midnight while the currents were in a lull. But the currents around the accident site were stronger than expected, hindering the underwater rescue efforts. While the underwater operation is stalling, vessels continue to search for survivors on the sea. The Dokdo amphibious ship, which has served as the command center during the Cheonam incident, arrived at the capsized location around 11 Wednesday night to take part in this rescue operation.
The captain of the Sewol ferry may have been trying to make up for lost time by taking a shortcut rather than the recommended route to Jeju Island. Dense fog delayed the ship's departure.
Just as an airplane must follow a flight path, a ship must sail on a recommended course. It was found that the capsized ferry did not use the safer recommended route as designated by the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries.
그쪽으로 항로를 안 잡아야 되는 겁니다. 조금 멀더라도 둘러가지고 제주도 이쪽으로 빠지는데.
The Incheon-Jeju course set by the ministry passes south of Byungpung Island in the southwestern area of the sea. But the Sewol took a route that passed the northern side of the island instead of the recommended path that passes the southwest side. The shortcut would have shaved off 15 miles in distance and about 30 minutes for the trip.
그렇게 이제 추측은 할 수 있겠는데 지금까지 파악을 갖다 해본 결과 그렇게까지는 하지 않은 걸로.
Also, the fog was quite dense at the time of the Sewol's departure from Incheon port. The ferry was able to leave the port only after the visibility alert was canceled, which was 2 hours after the scheduled departure time. But the Sewol was the only passenger ship that had sailed off from Incheon amid the blanket of dense fog on Tuesday and Wednesday.
Survivors of the Sewol sinking report utter pandemonium on the ship when there was the sound of a collision. The panic continued with the ship's submergence. Here's a reconstruction of events.
It was 8:45 a.m. when a thump sound was heard from the front part of the vessel. The ferry then immediately tilted to the left, and passengers and cargo all tumbled to one side. It was complete chaos.
갑자기 배가 막 기울었던 거 한꺼번에 이렇게. 그게 시간이 그 몇십 초도 안 돼요. 1분 내에요.
45 minutes later, at around 9:30, the ferry is already tilted by more than 45 degrees according to this photo shot for the first time at that time. The Navy and Coast Guard begin their rescue operation in full swing, but the pace is slow. The ferry then goes over 90 degrees while passengers clinging to the deck rail shout for their lives.
한번 와당탕 하니까 배가 완전 수장시켜 버리더라고. 완전 고래 등불에 보이듯이 그렇게만 딱 보이더라고.
Once the huge vessel began to tilt, there was no stopping. As soon as it turned upside down, the ferry sank underwater around 11 a.m. with just the tip of its front part showing above the waves. The 2 hours and 20 minutes from the deadly thump to the eventual sinking were pure agony for those on board.
We now bring you images captured by the rescue team at the site of the sinking ferry. Get a glimpse of the tense moments in the rescue effort.
The passenger ship is almost on its side, close to a 90-degree angle. Passengers are spotted here and there, desperately clinging to the rails so that they do not fall off the boat. Even when their own lives are at stake, they point to inside the ship, saying that more people are trapped within. Each step that the passengers take is a matter of life and death as they are moved from the ferry to a rescue boat. High school girls, with their hair soaked, are shocked and bewildered, frantically calling out to their missing friends. This man, carrying a girl who appears no older than 5 years old, urgently asks for help. A person can fall into the deep sea if one loses one's footing, but this high school student remains calm. Some of the passengers were lucky enough to stay above water, waiting for a rescue helicopter. But there is not much time left to flee the boat before it completely goes underwater. Those who have reached land also suffer from injuries and hypothermia. The rescue scene was nothing less of a desperate and close escape from death.
Most of the passengers that sustained injuries were either struck by tumbling equipment and luggage on the boat's deck or tumbled themselves when it began listing rapidly. Some passengers even sustained bad burns.
At around 9:30 a.m. of April 16th, which is half an hour after the accident, the Sewol had already tilted to its left side by about 60 degrees. Vending machines which were not attached firmly to the floor fell right onto the passengers and caused serious injuries. Suitcases also started falling onto people.
짐도 다 떨어지고 물건도 다 떨어지고 해서 부딪히고 벽에 치이고 해서 짐에 치여서 머리 다쳤다는 친구들도 있고.
After the ship had tilted completely, passengers who were trying to hang on to nearby objects and bars started falling down, injuring their backs and legs. Those who jumped into the sea said their bodies became stiff in the cold water, which is a symptom of hypothermia. Quite a few of the passengers got burns when hot water and food spilled over from the kitchen, restaurants, and stores. Some were directly hit by the water, while others slipped and fell onto the floor covered with hot water.
입수 초기 환자들이 지금 많이 오고 그래서 지금 뭐 저체력 정도는 아주 심한 환자들은 아니고요. 약간 이제 화상하고 이제 그런 환자들이 대부분이고요.
Everything on the ship, including items, machinery, and gushing water, posed big threat to the passengers.
Witnesses say that after the initial collision, an announcement could be heard urging them to stay where they were. This and a power failure severely hampered efforts to escape.
The moment the Sewol was struck and started listing rapidly, an announcement was made instructing the passengers to wait instead of evacuating.
위험해서 움직이지 말라고 해서 아무도 움직이지 않고 있어서 상황은 잘 모르는데요.
As the situation looked life-threatening, some of the passengers tried to escape from the ship, but even their efforts were hampered due to a blackout.
불이 그 전등 같은 게 꺼졌었나요? 네, 꺼지고 다시 들어왔어요.
The power outage occurred because the engine room was flooded, which caused the engine to stop. The passengers couldn't open the doors because of the pressure that occurred when the ferry started listing.
하중에 의해서도 그렇고 각도가 벌써 90도로 돼 있기 때문에 눌리는 힘이 있고.
Those who did manage to open the doors and get outside had a hard time walking in the hallway because the ship was rolling onto its side.
30도 이상 옆으로 기울었다고 생각할 때 제대로 걸어가질 못해요. 기어서 올라가야 되는데.
Passengers who managed to escape had to jump off into the sea and wait to be rescued because the lifeboats were not released.
Students rescued from the sinking ferry were transported to a hospital in Ansan for treatment and counseling. Many have been reunited with their families, but some parents have traveled to the accident site in Jindo.
The students are arriving at the hospital, getting off the bus one after another. Parents hug them tightly, thankful that their children are in their arms safe at last.
전화도 안 받고 메시지도 안 오는 거야. 지옥 가도 천당 가도 기분이지.
From around 7:30 last night to early this morning, some 60 Danwon high school students were admitted to this hospital in Ansan. Doctors said that although the students didn't suffer serious injuries, they would have experienced great emotional shocks and will undergo psychological therapy and counseling.
힘든 상황을 겪었고 또 외상 후 스트레스 장애나 이런 것들에
가능성이 많은 상태이기 때문에 정신과적인 검진을 실시할 예정입니다.
Meanwhile, some 400 parents left for Tindo near the accident site. They had been waiting for the news of their children at Panon High School. Now only a few parents and students remain at the school waiting to hear more from the scene. Some parents fainted upon hearing the news about the fatalities and had to be transported to the hospital. The Gyeonggi Provincial Office of Education is investigating where the school had pushed ahead with a class trip, despite the horrid weather. In the meantime, roughly 30 family members of the missing students and civic activists held a candlelight vigil at Panon High School to pray for their safe return.
It's been well over 24 hours since the sinking of the Sewol ferry, meaning any survivors still on board would have had to stay the night inside. They face hazards of hypothermia and drowning.
The area where the accident took place reported overnight temperatures of 15 to 16 degrees Celsius. The water temperature was even lower at 11 degrees. Experts say that when exposed to water at this temperature for about 30 minutes, a person can face hypothermia and see their body temperature drop by over 3 degrees. If he or she loses consciousness, water can enter into one's respiratory tract, which could trigger acute pulmonary insufficiency. When dry, people can survive for up to 6 hours in temperatures at minus 12 degrees Celsius. But it's different when immersed in water. A water temperature of 16 degrees will still inflict pain, and the length of survival is only 8 hours. If the water temperature drops to around 4 degrees and a person doesn't move around and stay still, the individual is likely to die within an hour.
차가운 물에 젖어서 저체온이 더 빨리 생길 뿐만 아니라 회복이 조속히 되지 않으면 사망에 이를 수 있는 결과를 초래하게 됩니다.
But in the case of large passenger ships, there are many isolated areas, such as cabins, where there can be air pockets. Last December, a Nigerian man in his 20s was on board a vessel that sunk in the Atlantic Ocean. He was rescued after 60 hours. To survive, he drank beverages and stayed in an air pocket. Time is of the essence in locating the survivors.
In the coming days, lifting the capsized ship will mount a significant challenge in comparison with the efforts to lift the naval corvette Cheonam, which sank 4 years ago. The Sewol ferry is 10 times heavier.
The naval corvette Cheonam sank in waters off Baekmyeong Island 4 years ago. It was lifted by a large crane using steel chains. But the sunken ferry Sewol weighs more than 6,000 tons, which is 10 times the weight of the Cheonam. The weight of the water inside the ship and the adhesive strength between the ship and the mud flat also add to its weight. Only machinery that can lift at least 10,000 tons can lift the capsized ferry. It's also essential to minimize the ship's weight by inserting airbags. Preparations for lifting the Sewol will begin as soon as 3 offshore cranes, which weighing over 3,000 tons, arrive at the scene of the accident. The most difficult part will be lifting the ship out of the water because the weight of water inside the ship is enormous.
천안함처럼 작은 선체가 아니기 때문에 바지에 그냥 엉키기 쉽지 않을 겁니다. 수면까지 끌어올린 뒤에 2인선으로 해서 끝으로 끌어와야 할 것이라고 생각합니다.
Numerous hurdles still lie ahead of the lifting process because finding missing passengers is a top priority at this point. There's also little time for lifting due to the strong weather current.
동일한 서해안이긴 하지만 조류의 그런 속도를 보자면 백령도보다는 진도 연안이 급격히 빠른 것으로 파악되고 있고.
It took 17 days to lift the Cheonam vessel, which weighed only 1/10 of the Sewol.
Now we'll take a look at the markets, followed by the world weather. And that's it for this edition of News Today. We'll see you again at the same time tomorrow. Have a great day.